CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Global oil prices surge after the OPEC Plus group announces a surprise cut in production. We'll look at how the markets have reacted.
Our other headlines, UBS shares fall on reports of mass job losses and a criminal investigation into its takeover of Credit Suisse.
Ditching the dollar. Countries are opting out of the currency to mitigate risks, and China is hoping more of them will adopt the yuan.
Finland is about to become the 31st member of NATO. Its request to join the military alliance prompted by the war in Ukraine.
And it's one of the world's most popular drinks, but you might not have heard of China's national tipple. Now Baijiu sets its sights on exports.
Oil prices have surged after the OPEC Plus group of oil producers announced a surprise cut in production. Our correspondent Jim Stenman reports.
OPEC Plus announced oil output cuts in the region of 1.16 million barrels per day. According to a Reuters calculation, it will bring the total volume of cuts by OPEC Plus, which includes Saudi Arabia and Russia, to 3.66 million barrels per day, or 3.7% of global demand. The decision by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies came just a day ahead of a virtual meeting of an OPEC Plus ministerial panel where many expected current cuts of 2 million barrels per day to remain. Just last month, oil prices fell towards $70 a barrel, the lowest in 15 months, over concerns of how a global banking crisis may impact demand. Sunday's announcement could lift oil prices by $10 per barrel. That's according to Pickering Energy Partners. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer, will cut its output by 500,000 barrels per day in a move it says is designed to support the stability of the oil market. Now, it is not the first time that OPEC Plus finds itself at odds with the White House. Late last year, the group decided to cut output, which boosts oil prices due to tighter demand, just ahead of America's crucial midterm elections.
So how have the European markets reacted to that cut in oil production and the resulting spike in the oil price? Let's look at the FTSE here in London. That was buoyed up as energy shares rallied. It's up around 0.5% and reached a 3-week high during trading. France's CAC also up by 0.2%, but the Pan-European Stock 600 is down very slightly, down just over 0.1%.
Well, Stephen Schork is founder and editor of the Schork Report, which focuses on the global energy market. Stephen, for those of us who are not oil experts like you, what's behind the surprise million-barrel production cut by OPEC Plus, in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. To keep it very simple, it's all about supply and demand. And that's all what economics are. So what OPEC's concern is that there's too much supply on the market, or there'll be too much supply in the market, keeping in mind that we're really not at the busiest point. And actually, we're at the weakest point of the season as far as demand is concerned. But as in the Northern Hemisphere, as the temperatures increase, holiday traffic, gasoline demand will pick up. You typically see a jump in price. But at this particular time, the signal that we are getting from OPEC is that they are certainly concerned about economic growth. In fact, they're concerned about economic contraction, which could be exacerbated now by what we've seen in the banking industry. So therefore, the signal from OPEC is that they're expecting weaker demand going forward, and that is a concern because weak demand for oil means a weak economy.
The United States has been calling for producers to increase output in order to push energy prices lower. What do you make of OPEC Plus going in entirely the opposite direction?
Well, OPEC does not exist for any certain political party here in the United States. So regardless of which party is calling for it, and typically it's only one party that is doing this. But rather, OPEC is, it is an organization that is a member organization. Each member looks out for its own self-interest at this point. So calling for production while at the same time you are hampering via legislative moves or rhetoric. You are hampering your own production in your own country here in the United States, and yet you want other countries to do your heavy lifting. So this administration can call for as much production increase. They want the other guy to do it, and they will not embrace their own. So if you're the other guy, what is happening right now? The United States is draining its strategic supply of oil. This is not commercial oil. This is not oil there is a commercial demand for. The United States is just dumping this oil on the market. If you're OPEC, why are you going to compete with that? It's better off for you to reserve your supply and wait for a higher priced environment.
Stephen, presumably Sunday's announcement underlines the rather close cooperation between oil-producing countries and Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've seen that OPEC and Russia get together. In fact, I was at the OPEC meeting when Russia, this was probably back in 2007, I was in the room when Sechin and the Russian delegates walked in, and no one was expecting that. So we're looking at a relationship between Russia and OPEC that's been 15 years in the making. And clearly with what we're seeing now, Russia being kind of a quasi-member of OPEC, certainly you're seeing those two working together and trying to coordinate their moves on the global market. And that shall continue to grow that relationship.
Stephen, thanks for your time. Come back on the programme soon. Stephen Shaw from Pennsylvania in the United States.
Thank you, Jamie.
Shares in Swiss banking giant UBS dipped 3% after the country's prosecutor opened a criminal investigation into its emergency takeover of rival Credit Suisse. The multinational lender has also been hit with reports that it may slash its workforce by up to 30% after the completion of the emergency merger last month. Well, our correspondent Juliet Mann is following the story for us. So we thought this takeover was a done deal, didn't we? But UBS now facing a criminal probe. What's going on?
Well, the Swiss prosecutors want to make sure that this deal is above board and that nothing in it is going to sully Switzerland's reputation as a global financial centre. Because don't forget, all of this happened very, very quickly. You know, Credit Suisse was hemorrhaging deposits, shareholders were dumping their stock, and creditors needed paying back, so the share price plunged. The banking sector, the whole of it got wobbly, and then we had jitters across the whole of the financial sector. So the Swiss government and the regulators, they engineered this agreement to calm these worries about the global financial system. And UBS paid $3.25 billion, which was way below market value for Credit Suisse. I mean, just the Friday before, it was worth $8 billion. But go a little bit further back, and it had been worth $80 billion. So it was some deal, but a deal that caused a stink with some of the taxpayers and also with shareholders because they didn't get to vote on this takeover. And also consider that Credit Suisse has been making the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Even before all of this financial stuff, they've been making bad bets on hedge funds. They've been fined for failing to prevent money laundering by a Bulgarian drugs ring, and also for not reporting offshore accounts held by American investors who wanted to avoid paying taxes. So the prosecutors are looking into potential breaches by government officials, by regulators, by banking executives. And they say this is really, they're proactively fulfilling its remit and their responsibility to contribute to a clean Swiss financial sector.
And what about these reports of thousands of job losses?
OK, well, job cuts were already on the cards at Credit Suisse. They were looking to reduce the headcount by about 9,000. But what we're talking about now is potentially 36,000 jobs at risk. 11,000 of those in Switzerland alone. The cuts will mainly be in Credit Suisse's investment banking arm. I mean, that's where a lot of the scandals sort of emanated from, you know, way before all of this financial turmoil came to light. UBS's chairman, he has said, you know, previously that his plan was to downsize that part of the business for those reasons. But the combined new bank is looking to slash 20 to 30% of jobs. And I know I'm throwing numbers at you here, but these are two of the biggest banks in the world. So that's a lot of job losses. I mean, combined, we're talking about a bank that will have 120,000 people around the world. But really, there's a lot of jobs. And I expect we're going to be hearing a lot more about this throughout the week, because on Tuesday, it's Credit Suisse's annual shareholders meeting taking place in Zurich. Investors are going to have a lot of searching questions there. And then UBS has its annual meeting the following day in Basel.
Juliet, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Juliet Mann. We're watching CGTN, still ahead. Donald Trump is expected to head to New York ahead of a court hearing on charges related to hush money paid to a porn star.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says Finland will join the defence alliance on Tuesday.
The announcement comes 4 days after Turkey approved a bill to green-light Finland's application. Ankara was the last of the 30 members to ratify Finland's membership. Helsinki's request to join came after last year's Russian attack on Ukraine. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Alex, so Finland finally making it into the NATO military alliance. It's a momentous announcement, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a momentous announcement and a very, very big shift in Finnish security policy, Finnish foreign policy. Finland has been historically neutral basically throughout most of the 20th century, and this is a very big change in its position when it regards to military alliances, something it hadn't joined in the past. But as you mentioned, Russia's invasion of Ukraine changed everything. There was a concern in Helsinki for Moscow's lack of respect of territorial integrity when it came to Ukraine, and perhaps a fear that the same could happen in the Nordic countries or even in the Baltic countries. So Finland really feeling the need to get closer to NATO and join the alliance. That application, that joint application, went in with Sweden last July, so we're looking at just under a year of this process. Quite speedy by NATO standards. A year and a half is, or a year is usually the shortest time frame you can imagine for NATO membership. Obviously, that was slowed down by the tensions around Sweden and Turkey blocking the accession. There was a hope by NATO and by Finland and Sweden that the two could join together. That was very much the hope at the beginning. That was given up in the last few weeks. Now, the accession will be marked tomorrow at NATO headquarters with a flag-raising ceremony. The Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg will be there, as well as all the other NATO foreign ministers who are there for a separate meeting. So that will be a very big, momentous moment for Finland. The Finnish foreign minister saying it is a historic moment for us, for Finland, and the most important objective at tomorrow's meeting, beyond that flag-raising, that ceremonial aspect, will be to emphasize NATO's support of Ukraine as Russia continues its illegal aggression. That was the foreign minister reacting to the news, and Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary-General, saying it will be a good day for Finland's security, for Nordic security, and for NATO as a whole, Jamie.
OK, well, that's Finland. Sweden, still waiting. Do we think Turkey will give its approval on that anytime soon?
Yeah, Sweden's still waiting slightly awkwardly out in the cold. Obviously, that was supposed to be a joint application, and that was given up on a little while ago. Turkey has not, or the Turkish parliament has not scheduled a vote on Sweden's accession. They also have elections coming up in May, which could slow down this process. You also have the objection from Hungary, Hungarian parliamentarians or Hungarian representatives saying part of the frustration or the difficulty for Hungary is that they have issues with some of the criticism out of Stockholm of Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary. So these issues seem unresolved, although progress has been made. Jens Stoltenberg a couple of weeks ago at NATO saying all of the security concerns that Turkey had have been addressed by Sweden, and so now it's only a matter of time. Obviously, domestic politics will get in the way there. The new hope, the new timeline for NATO will be that big NATO leaders meeting in Vilnius in July. That will be a hopeful target. But last time Jens Stoltenberg gave a press conference, he was drawn on this. He was asked, are you still hopeful? And he didn't want to commit to a timeline. So it's not particularly clear. The sense is that it will happen. The question of when, well, that will be a matter of international politics, Jamie.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
Conflicting claims are coming out of the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. A Russian mercenary group has claimed to have raised Moscow's flag in the centre, but Kyiv says its defences are holding strong. Fighting has raged in the city of Bakhmut, seeing some of the bloodiest battles of the conflict. Both sides have suffered huge casualties, and much of the city has been devastated by bombardment. I asked our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow about who exactly is in control of Bakhmut at the moment.
There's no mention of the situation in Bakhmut in the most recent briefing by the Russian Defense Ministry. However, we've heard previously from the acting head of Donetsk Republic, Denis Pushilin, saying that the Russian forces have been still fighting in the central parts of Bakhmut and that they were coming closer to the railway station. He also said that several thousands of civilians still remained in the town. A couple of days ago, he was also the one who said that over 70% of the town were under the control of the Russian forces. But very interestingly, we've heard from the head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, saying that he raised the Russian flag over the building of the local administration and that judicially now the city was under the control of the Russian armed forces. At the same time, he also noted that fighting was still ongoing in the western parts of this city. So as we understand, the situation is still developing, and definitely we will be looking forward to the briefing of Russia's Ministry of Defense that will be providing more details as to what is actually happening and who is in control of this town.
And what do we know about the investigation into the killing of the Russian military blogger Vladimir Jatarsky?
Well, indeed, we understand that a set of measures has been taken with regards to this investigation, and the Russian authorities now consider the explosion at a cafe in St. Petersburg as an act of terrorism. We've heard that the Russian investigative committee has managed to detain the main suspect, who is Daria Trepova. She's 26 years old, and we know that she has been holding some anti-war views and participating in the rallies that took place in St. Petersburg when the Russian Federation started its so-called special military operation in Ukraine. Now, what we also have seen was the tape of her being questioned by the Russian authorities. She has admitted to having brought the statuette that has later exploded and killed this military blogger Vladimir Tatarsky. She said she would let the investigators know later who has actually given the statuette to her, but also she has admitted to having done so. At the same time, we have heard from the Kremlin saying that that was clearly an act of terrorism, and that the National Anti-Terrorist Committee of the Russian Federation also had the information that this attack has been perpetrated from the Ukrainian territory, and then the perpetrators have been assisted by the people who support the oppositional blogger Alexei Navalny, who is also jailed in Russia. So this whole story is very complex, as we have heard also that the explosion took place at the street bar cafe in St. Petersburg, which used to be owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner mercenary group. So definitely more details will be provided by the Russian Investigative Committee, but at the moment it is classified as an act of terrorism that has been perpetrated from the Ukrainian territory.
Former US President Donald Trump is about to fly to New York ahead of his court hearing on Tuesday related to hush money allegedly paid to a porn star before the 2016 presidential election. New York City police have stepped up security ahead of Mr. Trump's arrival. He's the first former president to face criminal charges. His lawyers say he intends to plead not guilty. We can show you the live pictures, I think, of Mr. Trump's gate. I'm not sure if that's his garden gate or his front gate, but anyway, it's Donald Trump's gate, and we're expecting him to drive out of there. Unless, of course, there is a rear entrance to the property, in which case he won't drive out of there. He'll have gone already. Anyway, we might keep on watching that, because you never know what happens on live television. He may emerge, he may not. we can say for certainty we can talk to our correspondent Nick Harper, who is outside Mr. Trump's residence, very nearby in Florida. Nick, good to see you. Well, when is Mr. Trump expected in New York? And talk us through what happens then.
Well, Jamie, according to his own schedule, he is now late by about 10 or 15 minutes. He said that he was going to be leaving his property dead on noon. That was a few moments ago. And driving past me along this road to West Palm Beach International Airport, it's just a few miles away, getting on his jet and then flying to New York City, a flight of just a couple of hours. It hasn't happened yet. It may happen in the next few minutes while we're on air. If it does, we'll undoubtedly hear police sirens going past and his supporters who are gathered here cheering and other cars honking as well. There's not a huge amount of supporters, perhaps a couple of dozen now in many ways. Media organisations, the camera crews, we are outnumbering the number of people who are here, but I'm told that there are several dozen lining the streets on the way to the airport. Another group of people gathered at the airport as well, waiting to watch Donald Trump's private jet take off. But yes, then he heads to New York City. He'll be spending the night in Trump Tower, all ahead of that appearance at 2:15 p.m. Tuesday. We're told he will be getting to the court a couple of hours before that for processing. That's likely where he'll have his fingerprints taken, potentially that mugshot as well. But authorities are saying that they don't intend for there to be a perp walk where he would be surrounded by a media scrum. It's likely that they will try and get him in quietly and securely to the courthouse building.
Nick, while you've been talking to us, we've watched the Trump motorcade leave Mr. Trump's residence in Florida. So he's on his way, if indeed he is in those cars. But anyway, we'll assume that he is. Let me ask you about the other legal troubles that Mr. Trump is facing, because this isn't his only legal problem, is it? I mean, he's the focus of other state and federal investigations.
Yeah, that's right, Jamie. There's plenty in the background that's still going on. This is the first case to indict him, but it might not actually be the first one that comes to trial, largely because legal experts say that it will take a long time for prosecutors to amass all the documents that they need. There's some other cases going on, one in the state of Georgia looking at his efforts to overturn the election result. You may remember he asked election officials to find more votes. There are two federal investigations, one relating to the classified documents found in his Mar-a-Lago property just behind me when the FBI raided last summer, and another one looking at the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol 2 years ago, looking at his actions, his words, his rhetoric in the days leading up to it and on the day itself. So plenty there in the background that's also being looked into in terms of Donald Trump's past dealings.
Nick, we're watching live pictures of presumably Mr. Trump's supporters lining the route of his motorcade. I mean, what do these people make of this legal action? Are they emboldened in their support, or is there a sense that President Trump, former President Trump's star, is somewhat waning as this drags on?
Well, certainly not for the people here, not for the people who've turned out in this hot Florida sunshine. Those are the die-hard, passionate Trump supporters. In fact, I can hear the motorcade coming along just alongside the road here. These are the people who feel that President Trump is being maligned by the Democrat Party, that they're undermining his chances to try and get into the White House again next year. They feel that this is just a political attack, and they feel that he is completely innocent. They are here to support him and continue to back him throughout the next many months before we head into the November 2024 election. All the people that I've been speaking to saying that they are out here because they think the indictment is a load of nonsense that the Democrats have made up, and they want to back their man to the hilt.
Nick, thank you for that. That's our correspondent, Nick Harper, and we've been watching live pictures of former President Donald Trump leaving his residence in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, heading to New York ahead of his court hearing on Tuesday related to that hush money allegedly paid to a porn star.
Bulgaria's parliamentary election has again failed to produce a clear winner. Voters went to the polls for the 5th time in 2 years to elect a new parliament after previous ones failed to form a working government. Preliminary results show the GERB, the party of ousted Prime Minister Boyko Borisov, slightly ahead of the Liberal coalition formed by Democratic Bulgaria and the We Continue the Change party. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez in Sofia. So, Pablo, some challenges ahead for these parties when it comes to forming a governing coalition.
That is correct. Well, right now, the GERB, this is the party that is led by former Bulgarian Prime Minister Boyko Borisov, if indeed ends up on top of this election, the 5th parliamentary election to be held in just 2 years, will have very hard challenges to form a working government, and that is because of its recent past. In 2020, Borisov was ousted amid a corruption scandal that gave rise to that coalition formed by Democratic Bulgaria, and We Continue the Change. These two parties are Bulgaria's second political force, and working with the GERB is almost seen as something that is impossible because they were created with the sole purpose of keeping Borisov out of power. Now, if we look at the last 2 years of elections here in Bulgaria, we know that only one government has been elected, and that failed because the coalition basically was broken apart, and there's other 4 caretaker governments that have been in charge of getting the gears of government running. However, these caretaker governments are limited in power. They cannot pass a budget. Right now, the 2023 budget is pending, and because of this crisis, we have seen the target date for the euro to be adopted. It has been moved. So there are some real life repercussions to this political instability that is likely to continue, as some parties are already calling for a 6th electoral parliamentary election in the fall.
So over this past 2 years, 5 elections, the far-right party Revival has been gaining ground. How did it do this time?
Well, that is the remarkable part of this story, because if we look at the election results over the last 2 years, for instance, during the 4th parliamentary election that was just held in October, Revival had 10% of the vote. Right now, they have over 14% of the vote. Now, the Revival leader came out on national television a few minutes after the polls closed, and he said that he is not going to work with either the GERB, Democratic Bulgaria, or We Continue the Change. He says that he's going to look for support with other parties that are also on the fringe of Bulgarian politics. Now, Revival is a party that wants to pull Bulgaria out of NATO. It wants to pull Bulgaria out of the EU. It's considered to be a pro-Russian party, and they've been running on this platform saying that they will restore change. They will bring change to Bulgaria, but also restore the politics here, and that is gaining traction with voters.
Pablo, thank you very much. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez in Sofia.
Montenegro's former economy minister is set to become the country's new president after a landslide victory. 36-year-old Jakov Milatovic, who campaigned on a pro-EU and anti-corruption platform, won around 60% of the vote in the runoff ballot. CGTN's correspondent Alyosha Malenkovic has the story.
Celebrations on the streets of Montenegro's capital. People driving cars through the main city streets, waving flags and honking car horns. Just minutes before, it was clear that Jakov Milatovic won a landslide victory over Milo Djukanovic.
Tonight is the night that we've been waiting for more than 30 years. And Godspeed to this victory for all of us.
At the headquarters of Milatovic's Europe Now party, many opposition leaders came to show support. And the Prime Minister, Dritan Abazovic, was there too to back the political direction of the new president.
This evening, Montenegro made a decisive step forward. It said goodbye to this obsolete regime of Mr. Đukanović and made a step forward towards the richer, more just, equal, prettier and European Montenegro. And Godspeed to us.
While Milotovic's supporters celebrated in Europe now, at Đukanovic's DPS, the atmosphere was somber. Yet Đukanović, in his final address, tried to be dignified in defeat.
Montenegro made its choice and I respect it. I congratulate Jakov Milatović on the trust he received in the election. I wish for him to be a successful president, because if he's a successful president, that might mean that Montenegro will be a successful nation, and it will continue to go toward its goal.
Đukanovic's mandate will end on May 21st. Many in the country say that it was marred with alleged corruption and organized crime scandals. The allegations most likely cost him the elections.
Montenegro has a new president. It is the end of an era, as Milo Đukanović is ousted after 33 years in power. The change is welcomed by many here, but the expectations from the new president are also high. Aljoša Milenković, CGTN, Podgorica.
Finland's Prime Minister Sanna Marin has conceded defeat in the country's parliamentary election. The opposition Conservative National Coalition Party came top, followed by the right-wing populist party, the Finns. Marin's party was third, with all three receiving around 20% of the vote, meaning a coalition will be required.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN Storyboard email newsletters. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Ditching the dollar and why China is hoping to convert more countries to the yuan.
Roger, making a last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. A reminder of our top story. Global oil prices surge after the OPEC Plus group announces a surprise cut in production.
Well, let's find out how Wall Street is reacting to that unexpected surge in the cost of crude oil. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett at the New York Stock Exchange. John, hi. Well, what reaction to the oil cut there?
Hi. Well, we woke up this morning, 5 a.m., all bleary-eyed, looking at the iPhone in the dark, and what have they done now? Nobody here was expecting this. And if you think that you're paying too much money at the petrol pumps right now, Saudi Arabia doesn't think you're paying enough. That's basically the bottom line here, because they've cut, or they're about to cut, by 1.6 million barrels. And Saudi says, oh, it's just a precaution. We need to make sure that we don't have too much surplus and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is, really, seen from here, that this cut, which will begin in May, plus the one they did in October, basically takes 3% of the world's oil supply off the market. Goodbye, it's gone. And that's going to push up prices, and it is inflationary. Now, the White House has got to be furious about this. They haven't commented so far, but you will remember that Biden went to see MBS, the leader of Saudi, in July last year and virtually begged him not to cut, but to increase oil production. And nothing really has happened. And now 2 cuts, one in October and now this one. Now, the administration here, they do have an official response. One word only, this cut is undesirable. That's what they say. And the problem in America, and I'm sure it's the same in Europe as well, is that this is the very beginning of the driving season. You know, when people go on their holidays, they pack the car, put the roof rack on, put the boat behind them, and off they go. And they're going to have to pay more in that season now for their gas, their petrol, and all of this is inflationary. Now, what do the markets here do? Well, first of all, cutting crude oil production is likely to drive up the cost of a gallon of gas here at the petrol pumps in America, because 60% of it comes from the price of crude oil. And all of this, just as everybody in America thinks they're beginning to lick inflation after a year and a half. So the dollar shot up in value. The crude oil price, of course, shot up today. And the markets, well, they're mixed, but they're mixed in kind of exactly the right way, as it were. The Dow is ahead by 0.7%. The NASDAQ, which is where all the high-tech companies that haven't really made a profit yet but will probably make money one day, that's been badly affected because it's affected by the inflation worry. And the S&P 500 is pretty much even Stevens at the moment. Money flowing heavily right now into anything associated with energy because of this price cut. Guys?
I've been distracted by this image of you and your holidays, loading your roof rack and the boat and your safari suit. Anyway, talking of cars, Tesla has had mixed sales news.
Socks with sandals. That's me. Oh, yes. Well, Tesla, yes. Now, the thing is, this is a deliveries story, basically. What they've done is they've gone and had a terrific quarter. Between the fourth quarter, the end of last year, and Friday, which is the end of the first quarter, they had record deliveries. They were up 4%, 422,875 vehicles. So that's very, very good. But the trouble is they did it with price cuts. That's the problem. And so Wall Street is now looking to see if you've made price cuts, which they've had to do because of very stiff competition, how much of that is going to affect the margins when they give us their earnings in about 2 weeks' time. So Wall Street looking now to see how much they make from the production of autos and how much they make from other things that the company basically produces. And Elon Musk's prediction of a 50% increase in deliveries for 2023 has slipped that little bit further back because of this news. So it's good and bad news, and Tesla is actually being sharply hit now. It's down 6% here, and that's interesting because Tesla has had a heck of a couple of days, because it was around $100 per share a couple of weeks ago, and it's more than $200, or it was at the end of last week, because of the resurgence into tech stocks again. But now it's being hit by this mixed delivery news.
John, very briefly, just a quick thought on one of the US's bellwether companies, and in fact one of the world's bellwether companies, McDonald's, and job cuts. What's going on at the burger company McDonald's?
Yes. Yeah, the Big Sack, not the Big Mac, I'm afraid to say. Shares up 0.8% today. They've shuttered their Chicago office. They want people to work from home, and by Wednesday they will tell how many of the 150,000 corporate workers that they have here and around the world who is going to stay and who is going to go. In January, McDonald's said they were facing difficult decisions. Their earnings are stable, but all of this comes as the Federal Reserve must review interest rates again in May. They don't meet in April. But these three stories, oil, Tesla and McDonald's, all factor into that. Guys?
John, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
There's a developing trend in the global currency market, the shift away from the US dollar, or what's known as de-dollarization. How much of a currency is held by central banks around the world indicates its status. The dollar accounts for 60% of all global foreign exchange reserves, down from 71% in the year 2000. And that compares with 20% for the euro and just 3% for China's renminbi, also called the yuan. That ratio doesn't reflect China's economic growth, and China aims to change that by encouraging its partners to buy and sell to each other using the renminbi instead of the dollar. Saudi Arabia has started to do this with some of its oil trades. France has also done the same with liquid and natural gas shipments, and Brazil has agreed to trade with China using the currency. One of the biggest shifts has been from Russia, with President Vladimir Putin telling China's Xi Jinping that Russia would use the renminbi in trade with African, Asian and Latin American partners. Russia has risen to become the fourth biggest renminbi user after the UK, Singapore and the US. Well, let's talk now to Jim O'Neill, an economist and former UK Treasury Minister. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. So you have spoken about the dominance of the US dollar in global finance, but you think it needs countering. Why is that?
Well, whilst there are new specifics, and a lot of academics have talked about the demise of the dollar for a long, long time, including over most of my near 40-year adult career in finance. It never happens, and there are a lot of important details why, but at the core, ultimately, the world's currency market should reflect the biggest economies in the world. And if it doesn't, you end up with the kind of complex cycles that we've seen so much the past 30 years, where the rest of the world is essentially dependent on the choices of the US central bank, the Federal Reserve. And when they're raising interest rates sharply, what it means is, because the dollar's so dependent, all these other currencies go down in value against the dollar, their imports go up in local currency terms, they have to raise interest rates even though it might not be justified domestically, etc., etc. And then when the Fed's cutting interest rates, the opposite happens. And so it means for other economies that aren't on the same cycle as the United States, they're constantly subject to the whims of the US central bank, which I quickly add has a domestic mandate. And it's a sort of very unsatisfactory state of affairs from a truly global perspective. We need to have, as I know, a number of key Chinese thinkers have thought 30 years, a more complex system where more currencies might be part of some kind of basket that plays some kind of broader role, but it's not easy to achieve.
Well, China, one of those countries, of course, pushing its own currency as an alternative to the dollar. We've also seen the first LNG trade in yuan. Are we already on the way to de-dollarization?
I mean, these are tiny, tiny steps. You know, I've been following this stuff for a long, long time, and if you go back to the days of when people thought Japan was going to take over the world, and you'd see people starting to buy Japanese yen for the first time in central banks, many of these anecdotes would be offered as to why the yen was going to take over. And of course, even more so when the euro was first introduced. And in that context, it was partly done by big European countries, the French in particular, who consciously didn't like the dominance of the dollar. But whilst the euro is now 20% of FX reserves, as you said, it's not really taken over at all, the kind of dominant role that the dollar has. So it might be, and you know, given China's ongoing growth, and at some point it's probably the case China will become bigger than the US. And in this regard, I note in purchasing power parity terms, I've just seen data that said in 2022 the BRICS collectively became bigger than the G7. If that carries on, at some unknown point in the future, it is inevitable, but I'm not sure it's going to be next week, because you need a lot of, going back to what I touched on earlier, you need a lot of these countries, China included, to really, really want to encourage foreign investors to be able to freely invest in and out of the RMB, for example. And as I'm sure you're more than aware, the Chinese authorities currently have very significant restrictions on what their own citizens can do with the RMB, never mind people elsewhere. So that's one of the bits. But as you see the BRICS countries getting closer, particularly in, let's call it, more geopolitical terms, or some of them, rather than economic, we probably will see more of these kind of developments that you cited. But, you know, it's very early days, I would say.
Jim O'Neill, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us today. That's Jim O'Neill, economist and former UK Treasury Minister.
More than 1,000 passport office workers in the UK have started a 5-week strike. Members of the Public and Commercial Services Union have walked out across England, Scotland and Wales in a row over working conditions and pay. The union is demanding a 10% pay rise for civil servants amid high inflation.
And teachers in England continue to stand firm on their demand for an above-inflation pay rise. Britain's largest education union says 98% of teachers voted to reject a rise of 4.5% in the next financial year, alongside a one-off payment of $1,200. New strike days are planned for the end of the month.
The Chinese electric car maker Li Auto saw sales jump nearly 66% in the first quarter, with more than 52,000 deliveries. Li Auto sold the most over that period out of the 3 major Chinese EV brands, including BYD and XPeng. This comes as China's electric vehicle sales rebounded further in March.
Shares of global cinema chain Cineworld plunged more than 30% after it failed to find a buyer for its UK, Irish and US businesses. The company will now try to raise $2.3 billion in new funding to get out of bankruptcy. Cineworld filed for US bankruptcy protection in September.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, it's the end of the road for rented e-scooters in Paris as the city votes to ban them from September.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Parisians have voted to ban rental electric scooters.
Results from a weekend referendum showed 90% of voters support this ban, although the turnout was very, very low. It comes after a rising number of injuries and deaths related to the use of e-scooters in the city over the last year. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, so the end of the road for what was really a cheap, environmentally friendly transport.
Yeah, Jamie, that's right. To touch on the vote by Parisians, 7% of those who are able to vote, 93% of people in the city choosing not to vote. The weather, unlike today, was pretty poor yesterday. It was cold, it was windy. There was also the Paris Marathon going on. Some of us were running in that race. Road closures affected to that. But it meant that people who were most motivated to vote, in fact, for those who were against, who wanted to see an end to those rentable scooters, you might be able to see some of them behind me there, when that car's moved out of the way, the blue signature colour of the DOT scooters. They are environmentally friendly in terms of their low emissions, and that's what first attracted the Paris City Hall to bring them in 2018. There were many different operators at that point. It's been whittled down now to just 3 who have a a licence. Lime, which is associated to Uber, and they're white. The blue dot ones you might be able to see, and also turquoise tier. There are 15,000 of these scooters across Paris, but from the 1st of September, they will no longer be able to be used, and they're all going to be removed in terms of the rentable scooters. We can come on to the other personal use scooters in a minute, but it means that although they were environmentally friendly at the start in 2018, we have heard recently from the Paris Mayor, Anne Hidalgo, saying that they're not actually that ecological because they are often left all in a heap. They are blocking the pavement, they are knocked over, they're ending up in the river, ending up in the canal, and of course they are dangerous, and we have seen a rise in accidents and deaths related to those who are not riding scooters responsibly.
Presumably, after a considerable investment, the businesses behind this are not happy. What have the e-scooter operators said about this?
Yeah, well, they said, the businesses, earlier this year, we're ready to make changes, and they brought in some modifications to how you can ride a scooter, starting with you need to be 18 or older, because you can't hire one without proof that you, the passport or a driving licence that you are 18 or older. They agreed to reduce the speed, and not only is it limited to 20 kilometres an hour just on the general highway, there are some areas identified by GPS in Paris where automatically your scooter goes down to 10 kilometres an hour is the top speed. And in addition to that, they added licence plates. But those scooters, the ones that you can see behind me, they're all going to be banned. What's not going to be banned are personal scooters. People have been buying e-scooters for many years now, and we saw last year 750,000 were bought in France in 1 year alone. They are not speed limited, and they can be racing along here at well over 50 miles an hour. They do not have to have licence plates, and they can carry several people at a time. And of course, you don't have to register to be 18-year-old to be able to ride one. So the campaigners are saying that there's a double standard there, that these environmentally friendly ones that are waiting on the side, that are ready to be picked up and dropped off as a way of getting people off the metro, zero emissions around the city, are going to be banned. But then the other ones, which are not controlled and not regulated, are still going to be able to be used.
Ross, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris.
French President Emmanuel Macron is hosting EU chief Ursula von der Leyen ahead of their joint visit to China this week. The two leaders are expected to discuss the Ukraine conflict as well as preparations for their visit to Beijing, where they will have a joint meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. Passport office workers in England, Scotland and Wales have begun a 5-week walkout. More than 1,000 staff are striking as part of a long-running dispute over pay, pensions and conditions. The union behind the strikes has warned that the industrial action will cause huge delays for those looking to renew their passports ahead of the summer holidays.
It's probably one of the world's most popular drinks, but you might not have heard of it. China's national spirit, baijiu, has been drunk there for centuries. Now a delegation from the China Alcoholic Drinks Association has paid a visit to the UK, hoping to boost sales. Our correspondent Li Jianhua reports.
For whiskey lovers, this is heaven. Tasting and toasting. Fans at Whiskey Live London get to enjoy a range of brands from across the world.
People who are into their whiskies have a chance not only to try some stuff that they may not have had the chance to try otherwise, but also to talk to the people that make it and the people that really understand it to develop their knowledge.
Last year, the Asia-Pacific region overtook the European Union as the industry's largest regional market. Exports to China in particular recorded double-digit growth as post-COVID recovery continues, topping $263 million last year.
I don't know how many bottles, but I know that there was a direct shipment from Scotland into China in August last year. The first shipment was 1 million bottles. I would imagine there's quite a lot of those bottles now finding their way to China.
Likewise, China is finding ways to export its national spirit baijiu to the UK and Europe. A delegation from the CADA, that's China's Alcoholic Drinks Association, has arrived to sign an agreement with Paragraph, a company that's committed to delivering services within the drinks sector. The aim is to send more Chinese baijiu to European retailers.
When it comes to drinking, there's a huge cultural difference between the Chinese and Westerners. The Chinese like drinking to socialize with others, and there must be Chinese food to go with it. We know the Chinese are keen about drinking etiquette, which is quite different.
For some, it's the taste and high alcohol content that make Chinese baijiu hard to take.
Oh, I think baijiu is very promising for the European market, but there needs to be experimentation. I have tasted fabulous baijiu mixed with fruit in a cocktail, so we need to present baijiu in a different way to the European people.
Official figures show that China produced 6.7 billion litres of baijiu last year. Experts say only a tiny fraction was exported.
The European market for Chinese baijiu is relatively young at this point, and the signing of the agreement may help baijiu push into the European market, and hopefully in the future we'll see baijiu share these shelves with whiskey. Li Jianhua, CGTN, London.
50 years ago, the first call with a mobile phone was made in New York. Decades later, there are few of us without a portable phone. And the man who made that first historic call thinks we're only at the beginning of the journey of what mobile technology can achieve. Our correspondent Paul Barber reports.
Picture the scene. It's April 3rd, 1973, on a corner of 6th Avenue, Manhattan, not too dissimilar to Chiswick High Road here in West London. Marty Cooper, an engineer with Motorola, whips out something that looks a bit like this. And he makes a call to his counterparts at rival firm Bell Laboratories.
Joel, I'm talking to you on a handheld cell phone, but a real cell phone, personal, portable, handheld. There was silence on the other end of the line. I think he was gritting his teeth.
History was made, and a decade later, Motorola had released the Dynatac 8000X. It cost the equivalent of nearly $12,000, had a talk time of 30 minutes, and took 10 hours to charge. It also weighed nearly 800 grams, more than 4 times what the Apple iPhone today weighs. And of course, no text messaging or camera, and the internet was still a long way off for most. Do you remember when mobiles looked like this?
I did. I worked in an office where we had a communal one in a case that you'd have to book in to take it out for the day. But it was very cool. Felt very cool at the time.
No texting though, no photos?
Absolutely not. No. Both hands probably to hold it, to make your call. But yeah, happy days actually. So
quite a bit of a nightmare, wasn't it? Inconvenient.
I've got a brick phone myself, like because he's not allowed one of these.
You call that a brick?
No, not a brick, but it's like brick phone. But no, I don't have a normal phone. I'm not allowed smartphones.
One day. So you might be quite comfortable with the old-fashioned phones that were this size. Could you hold that?
Okay. It's very heavy.
And can you imagine not being able to do anything apart from phone calls? Not even text messages?
No, I quite like texting. I couldn't really imagine that.
That heavy as well?
Yeah.
No.
What do you use your phone for?
Work, mainly. My life is here.
Marty Cooper describes himself as a dreamer and an optimist, and says he's hopeful that mobile technology is just getting started, with advances that have the potential to revolutionise areas like education and healthcare, and even stop wars. But he thinks the current designs leave something to be desired.
I think that the idea that you have to take a block of plastic like this and put it against your curved face and hold your hand up in an awkward position doesn't make any sense to me.
Cooper also worries about how these mobile supercomputer devices mean we don't have much privacy anymore, because so much about us is recorded. His other pet hate about his invention might be familiar to many of us.
I have to tell you, I am devastated when I see somebody crossing the street and looking at their cell phone. And that's a very common occurrence, and they are out of their minds.
Let's hope in another 50 years they will have found a way to stop that happening. Paul Barber, CGTN, London.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.